announcements that I'll make. So welcome everyone to our September webinar. Today's topic will focus on supporting community college students, lessons learned from Hurricane Harvey for COVID-19 context. Before we get started and before I make the introductions of our speakers, I wanted to make a couple of announcements. First of all, next Friday on September the 25th, from about 9:30 in the morning to 2:30, we will be hosting our Transfer Motivational Conference. And the virtual conference, I have placed the flyer for it in the chat box. If you're not seeing it, let me know and I can reshare it. This has been a wonderful, wonderful event for us in the past when we have done it on campus, usually in person during the summers. This is our first time doing it virtually, but we have sessions that are available that are really focused on supporting students and getting them engaged, getting them motivated, etc. And so we hope that students from all of the campuses will be able to attend. And then also on October the 16th from 9 to 4, we will be having our Ascender Fall Seminar. So information will be sent out. That is forthcoming. I think we're just working on finalizing the speakers for that day. And as always, if you have any events that are going on campus, especially pictures or artifacts that you can share of the great work that the campuses are doing, please make sure that you send that to Deborah McFaith, our Director of Communications, so that that can be reported out. We could just share the incredible work that the campuses are doing. And so without further ado, I want to go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Ruth Lopez and Dr. Marisa Moreno, who, along with Dr. Vincent Carrales, have been doing work on preparedness within, big events. And so I will go ahead and turn that over to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Doran. So again, my name is Dr. Ruth Lopez, and I'm an assistant professor in the K-12 program in the Department of Educational Leadership and Policy Studies at the University of Houston. So greetings to everyone. I think you might be calling in from all over Texas maybe, and Iowa. And so my work is focused on college access, broadly speaking. I've looked at issues such as like the intersection of immigration and education policies and issues that affect Latino students and supporting Latinas through higher education. Done a little bit of work all over the place, but my desire to do this work came from working in schools here in the Houston area about 15 years ago or so. Worked with middle and high school students preparing them for college. And so really excited to be here to talk a little bit about the research we're doing. Before I get to the presentation part, I want to give Dr. Moreno a chance to introduce herself.
Good afternoon, I'm Dr. Moreno. I direct the Advising Counseling Center at Lee College. I've been there in October 20 years. I too have a passion for middle school, high school. In fact, my dissertation topic was early college, high school. So I had the opportunity to work with those students and still continue to work with them now. But my jam is also advising. I do enjoy advising, working with students. I love the community college, and I am grateful to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me and having me.
Thank you. Make sure this goes forward here. So today I'm presenting, actually I forgot, his name was on the title page, but my colleague, Dr. Vincent Carrales, he couldn't be here today. So I'm presenting on our behalf. So the research that I'll be talking about will be work that we did together. And now we're excited because we've just entered into a collaboration with Dr. Moreno at Lee College. And so today I'm gonna give you a little bit of an overview of some research that we did based on Hurricane Harvey, which, as you may remember, Hurricane Harvey happened in the Houston area 3 years ago. Right now it's kind of almost 3 years ago to the day. And we did this research almost 2 years ago. So a little bit, almost like a year after the hurricane. So I'm gonna talk a little bit about our findings. And the reason we're connecting it to COVID is because, after COVID happened, there were so many lessons that we were reflecting on that we heard from students during our Harvey research. And so we thought it was worth discussing as colleges, universities, even schools are trying to figure out how best to support their students. And I know we have a lot of you from community colleges, so at the end of our presentation, we do hope to hear from you. After I do a little bit of an overview of the research, I also want to have a discussion or a plática with Dr. Moreno and talk about how Harvey affected their campus, and also how they're navigating COVID now, and if there's any similarities or differences or ways that they've figured out how to provide supports to students over this long trajectory, because it is, as I'll talk about later on, this is all long-term impacts that we're thinking about as well. So I'll go, and then a Q&A. Of course, feel free to put questions in the chat if you have them, and I'll try to address it if I'm able to catch it, or if not, I'll definitely look at that at the end of the presentation. And I know Dr. Doran mentioned she'd help with that. But of course, if you don't think of a question till later, feel free to bring it up when we're talking as well. And so, again, I may not have to give too much background on Hurricane Harvey that struck in 2017. And we received in this area, because I'm here in the Houston area, about 56 inches of rainfall in some areas of the Gulf Coast, $125 billion in losses. 33 counties were declared federal disaster areas, and over 30,000 people were temporarily displaced. And the temporary is interesting because it could have been a few weeks, but when we were talking to students, we were almost a year out and they were just moving back home. And then K-12 and higher education was closed for at least 2 weeks and sometimes longer. Even when we were doing our research, we had to, which was again almost a year out, we had to talk to the college about what campus was open already, and ready for us to be able to do data collection there. So unfortunately, some schools and colleges were affected and had damage as well. The college that I'm going to focus on was closed for 2 weeks. And this is without any online access and that sort of thing, which is one of the differences with COVID today. So some of the research on disasters. So that we looked at the research that had been done on the impact of disasters on students. And we looked at both children and young adults. We learned that the stress experienced during disasters can lead to subsequent long-term stressors. It could also lead to poor attendance, low academic performance, lack of participation in activities, and also tangible harms such as economic hardship, losing your job, damage to your home and personal belongings. So many students lost even their textbooks and computers, for example, and intangible harm, which is threats to personal safety, distrust in government, and separation from community. And again, we were looking at natural disasters here. For the most part, the research out there on the Gulf tended to be about hurricanes or oil spills in the Gulf Coast as well. But you might be able to tell already here that these are maybe some of the effects that you're seeing from COVID on your student populations. We found that a lot of the research done was also done on younger students, so K through 12, and on 4-year residential campuses. And so there is a lack of research on how hurricanes affect community college populations. And the framework that my colleague and I went into this with, first of all, we came from an asset-based perspective. So we said, what sources of strength did these students pull from in this difficult time? What supports did they have? They had been through a very traumatic event in a lot of ways. And how were they able to stay enrolled? Because the students that we interviewed are students that continued in college. So what made the difference for them? And so for that, we looked at the research around institutional agents. And so I'm glad Dr. Moreno is here because to talk with the advising perspective, because we wanted to know those individuals that help students navigate higher education in normal times, but also in disasters and in pandemics. Those that help them access social capital, such as resources that they might need to be successful. Those that share common ground and common experiences, and they provide holistic support and humanize these students' experiences. So they recognize that this is a difficult time to be going through, and they support them by recognizing that as well. And then they also are proactive and again, connect to resources. So this is the idea of what the research says about institutional agents. Those of you that work with students, you may be thinking, I have a lot of these values that I that I practice with helping students. Again, this research was done at Houston Community College, and it's one of the largest and most diverse community college systems in the country. And so we considered that, as well as we're thinking about who was impacted by this major disaster. They enroll about 85,000 students. It's an Asian American and Native American Pacific Islander serving institution, and it's also a Hispanic serving institution. In the fall of 2017, which was around the time that we were asking these students to reflect on, 25% of the students were Hispanic or Latino, 31% African American, 9% international. And many of the students are low income. So we set out to do interviews and focus groups. We really wanted to get a sense of the student perspective. The college did a great job of serving their students and finding out what the needs were. And so they knew that, and they wanted, in a way, to capture the stories from students. And so they called us to do this research. We sat with them and we pinpointed 5 campuses across the Houston area that had the most damage, or those communities were the most impacted. Something important to note about the community college is that could be taking classes across various campuses or online and on campus. And so that's something we considered as well. And so we recruited students through email, through call outs, and then also the days of, we hosted different focus groups and would walk around and ask students if they wanted to participate. From that, we were able to get 17 participants. In retrospect, this is kind of a finding in itself, is that we don't think that all students saw themselves as affected by the hurricane, and so that might have led to less participants than we anticipated. So I think they had this idea that you had to have flooded or you had to have been displaced in order to think that you were impacted by the hurricane. And even the ones, honestly, when we were talking to them and you had students that went through major damage, like, they were displaced, they still kind of talked about it as like, it wasn't that bad. And so that's something that we want to keep reflecting on is how do you identify when you've been affected by an event like this? And even in COVID, how do we identify who's affected by COVID if you have not directly been infected by the virus? And so that's something that we've learned from this. From our participants, 60% were African American, 6 were women, female, 5 were 21 or younger, so the majority were older than that. 5 were parents as well, and then 7 were financial aid recipients. And I put our positionality here because really important to note is that Dr. Carales and I were in the Houston area when Harvey struck, and so we were able to talk about it in a way that connected with the students as well. As something that we didn't anticipate either is that after the interviews, they would often a few times ask us, how are we affected by the hurricane and are we doing okay? And it honestly wasn't until we were in those focus groups that sometimes we reflected like, oh yeah, that was kind of scary, or I was affected by the hurricane. I know there were a few scary moments there where we were getting ready to evacuate our home. And so I think it's important to note that positionality that we had. A couple more slides. I just want to give you an overview of some of these students' powerful voices. I really wish this could all just be quotes from the students because they were just so gracious in sharing what they went through. And a way that we were looking at our findings was there was this immediate impact. So what happened during and like right after the storm, like a week or 2 out. And during, it could have been that their apartment or their home filled up with water, started getting mold. They had to evacuate their home. And then right after is that recovery period, trying to work with FEMA, get the insurance to help them get a new car, figure out where they're gonna stay. So there's right after the storm. They did feel reassured that the school canceled for 2 weeks. And so that helped them, that made, like we have a student here that says there wasn't a reason, sorry, there was another quote I didn't get to include, but where the student basically says, they really gave us a chance to get our life together. And so they saw those 2 weeks as really helpful for them, while they were able to work on recovery. Then we look at the long-term impact almost a year out. The long-term impact, you have these invisible ways that students, I would say invisible, because one student literally said they don't see how we're affected by Harvey anymore. So she had just moved back into her apartment, but she still didn't have furniture. And so she felt like she was back at school and there's really no one really talking about Harvey anymore, and how it might still, the impact of that storm was still affecting her day-to-day life. And so again, that might be something to think about when we think about COVID. And you know, hopefully one day going back to face-to-face, that normal and that long-term impact is going to be something to be aware of, even when we can't see it right in front of us. And then they had the moment of transitioning back to college. And some students shared that they were really close to making the decision to not return. And again, we talked to the ones that did return. There are students that did not return because of commitments to the family to help rebuild income and that sort of thing. But one student did share that the school came through. There wasn't a reason not to come. And so the college provided enough resources that she felt supported enough to keep going. The school, Houston Community College, right away sent out a survey to students. They made sure that if a student had a need, they called them back. Everyone received a call back. And there was also a hotline that students could call. And so they were very adamant about that resource and the fact that it wasn't just going out there without any response. The other thing they did was that students received financial aid early. They weren't expecting it. And the regular financial aid came through, and some of them were able to use that in their recovery period. Students indicated how helpful that was. They didn't even have to ask anyone. It just showed up early. They also provided emergency aid. There were a few barriers here. Students were very overwhelmed. You can imagine students are trying to get their car replaced, trying to figure out where they're going to live. And they had to fill out a paper form. And so those bureaucratic processes they're important, they're needed, right? But some students actually decided they just could not handle another form. They just couldn't sit there and tell their story again, you know, while they're living through this trauma. And so that's something that we've noticed. They were appreciative of the support, but just even the smallest requirement could cause a lot more stress in these high stress moments. And but they also provided a lot of support. Students shared how they could be in between classes and there was free food, free clothes, transportation vouchers so they could take the bus, which again was very important if you lost your car, which a lot of people did. And so there was holistic support when you think about it. And then in terms of the institutional agents, we found that students felt like faculty, administrators, and advisors were all working together. And that made it look like the institution was supporting them. So they felt like HCC supported them because all of these people were trying to help them. And something similar to what I shared about the positionality is that they felt that the people, such as these institutional agents, were in this together with them. They all went through Harvey together. And so they had this common experience. One student shared about their advisor. She's really been helping me. I call her a lot. I went from just going over my academic plan to somebody that feels what I'm going through for any of our students that had been affected by Harvey. So she's been there. She'll ask you how you're doing, how's school, how do you feel, how's work. She's really been there beyond an advisor, and that's been helping me. The other thing is that they indicated that these institutional agents showed authentic care and they were action oriented. So she made phone calls, but it was when she walked me over to financial aid. So, you know, they show them that they're gonna help them and they spend time with them. The other one was faculty providing flexibility and space to share experiences. And so flexibility, you know, with assignments, they understood that sometimes students didn't have access to technology, or they were, or their books were lost. One student, his books were flooded, and so his professor gave him a book. And so there was care and flexibility in those in that semester. Again, this was 2 semesters out, so students sort of felt like they could use a little bit more flexibility even in the second semester. And the other thing they did was that one student shared how his professor put them into a group the first weeks when school started, and the professor, she had them process, it was a math class, but she had them process the hurricane, share how they had been affected. And it really helped the students bond. And he had never had that experience in a class. And so he said that was a good thing that she did with that little group discussion. We all came together, and man, we all got through it. And so something that he shared later is that it actually helped them when they were doing math group work, because they all knew each other better. And so again, thinking about how that might relate to right now. I didn't, just because I want to keep it short right now, I didn't put too many more quotes, but one thing, recommendation that we did think about was making sure that professors, the staff, everyone has access to resources regarding mental health, because some students were going to a really hard time, and they couldn't even stop to think about what they needed. And even in retrospect, they're still going through a lot of that stress. And so I know that those resources are out there. So again, just trying to make it so they're more accessible. And there were also a lot of cultural issues. So making it cultural relevant, right? And normalizing that therapy is okay, that mental health supports are okay, because there are also those moments of like, not really being comfortable with therapy. So that's something that we recommended from this work. And then again, as I started the slides, I talked about how this might relate to COVID. And so some of the recommendations we shared, and you can actually scan this with your phone, the QR link, and it'll take you to a blog that Dr. Corrales and I wrote relating this research to COVID. I'm also happy to share the link once I stop sharing the screen later in the chat here. But again, providing resources are important, which, most community colleges did a great job doing that, but also being aware of barriers. We presented this to practitioners at Houston Community College, and one of them came up to us at the end and said, I didn't really like when you said that there were barriers to those resources, because I was working so hard to provide these resources. But then when you kept sharing how the student was appreciative of what we were providing, but they just couldn't bear to take that extra step at the moment to go get that resource, and I understood that. So they were empathetic to that feedback. I'll call it feedback, right? Practicing vulnerability and acknowledging the shared trauma. So students enjoyed learning that they made them feel better to hear the experience of their professors, their advisors, their administrators, and knowing that they were also going through this. Something we're doing a lot of now, but using even virtual classrooms as spaces to process the experience. So right now, I'm teaching, and I try to leave that time open at the beginning of class to just say, how's this week going? Because every single week is different during a pandemic. And then being prepared, like I said at the beginning, to provide long-term care, even after the crisis. So even when, we talk about, in the media, they talk about the return to normal, right? Just thinking about, especially those of us that are working in communities that are vulnerable, that are very highly affected by COVID, just thinking about what those long-term supports are going to look like and are going to be needed after this experience. So I'm happy to share more findings. We do have an article, hopefully it will get accepted somewhere at some point. And so more of these findings will come out, but I'm also always happy to connect about this work. And so right now, I'm gonna go ahead and ask Dr. Moreno to I think she's unmuted already, so that's great. So I wanted to structure this kind of like a dialogue, a plática, but also just give her the floor if something stood out. So I prepared some questions, but we don't have to go there. But I wanted to hear from you, anything you could remember. I know when you were prepping, it was like, oh my gosh, Harvey was 3 years ago. And so can you share how Lee College was affected? Y'all are in an area east of Houston, a lot of refineries, and so how did Harvey affect your community? And did you see some of these issues or other issues that came up for you?
I mean, I think we were very similar to HCC. So Lee College is located in Baytown, Texas, which is east of downtown Houston. We're about 20 miles away from downtown Houston, going towards Beaumont, Louisiana border. So We are a petrochemical town. We have Exxon, which I believe is either the second or the third largest refinery in the country here. So we have a lot of technical students that attend Lee College, and Harvey was different for Baytown. Born and raised in Baytown, I've lived here 40 plus years. It was the first time we've ever seen any kind of flooding in the way that it flooded in all parts of our service area. And not just, and we serve whole day Zeta, Anahuac, Huffman, Hardin, Dayton, Crosby, as well as Barbers Hill and Mount Bellevue. So, and I think there's some more that we actually serve way further east. And so we had to take in consideration not only just our Baytown campus, but we had to really consider all the other surrounding areas. And so a lot of what happened with us was, it came, if I remember correctly, the first week of school, we had to shut down. Then came Labor Day, where some of us had to go back in to work that day to actually start. We had to try to get rid of we had flooding in the school. And so some of us were trying to clean that up in preparation for students. We had dual enrollment classes. We have a huge dual enrollment population across all of our service area. So we had to take in consideration the school districts shut down. So we had to look at all of those things in terms of when our classes start, what does that mean for our dual enrollment students, our early college high school students? The school district was closed for, I believe, 3.5 weeks. We were only closed for about 2 weeks. And so we had to welcome the early college high school students earlier than the dual credit students and the rest in the school districts when they went back to high school. So just trying to accommodate those students. Our community had massive loss due to flooding. We had creeks and bayous that never ever flood in record amounts. We actually made the news for flooding, which has never ever happened before. So there was just a lot of mass loss, people completely displaced, students prepared for school that no longer had supplies, lost devices. So we had to really work hard on trying to get them as many resources as we could in preparation for the semester. We did end up having to back out some students who were just couldn't do it. Like there was just too much of a massive loss where their parents weren't able to do it, so they needed to help their parents, so they had to hang tight a semester before they came back. So there was just a lot of different things, the loss of electricity, loss of Wi-Fi, just a lot of things that were factoring against them. So for us, in terms of being able to provide services, so different than COVID, I will say. Once we get to COVID, that's a whole entire different ballgame. But we still provided services as best we can, but we mainly wanted to make sure that the well-being of our students were intact, and that if there were any other resources that we could provide for them, similar to what, HCC talked about, transportation, any food, if people lost their homes, where are they staying? We were a temporary shelter at some point. Just making sure that we had all of we were able to find displaced students or displaced community members and opportunities, work with our agencies around Baytown to just, do what we can to ensure our students and our community safety. So that's how we managed to get through that.
Thank you, Dr. Moreno, for sharing that. And, we're sharing this with you all as we are still living in hurricane season. And so I know here in the Gulf Coast, we're watching the news and there might be another system coming through. And so that's also something to think about. The students are living in a pandemic, but every time a big storm comes through, you kind of like hold your breath and hope that it's not going to flood, that students are scared, because of the trauma behind the hurricane. But yeah, thank you for touching on those points of the different coordination that it took to support the students. And yes, some students had to decide not to come back, and there were some that we talked to that were so close. They were so close to making that decision to not come back for a little while. And so thank you for sort of thinking far back to that time. And now that we're in COVID, I know it's so different, right? But are there any, it doesn't have to be directly connected to Harvey, but are there any sort of like supports that y'all already have put in because of Harvey? Or are there other supports that you're using at the moment that are really helpful for your students?
When COVID hit, it was during the time of our spring break. So we were shut down. But in the middle of our spring break, we were told that we were about to shut down permanently for a while. So from the advising perspective, we had to shift from face-to-face advising to complete virtual advising. And so during spring break, myself and a colleague worked really hard on creating a Blackboard Collaborate, because our platform is Blackboard. And so we wanted to do something within a platform that students were already familiar with. So we created Blackboard Collaborate advising, where we can actually have face-to-face visual advising with students. And we started that on March 16th. So we wanted to make sure that there was and we didn't go back to campus until, we didn't actually start classes after spring break. It was a 2-week spring break for our students. I'm not sure about y'all's campus, but it was a 2-week spring break for our students. And so we didn't actually start school back up until March 23rd, because our entire campus had to shift to virtual, which is very difficult for technical programs. In our biology, 2 of our biggest ones is process technology, instrumentation, and also nursing. And so those are hands-on technical programs that need to be face-to-face in some capacity, including the biology 2401 anatomy and physiology class, and some of the other classes that are necessary prerequisites to those programs. And so trying to navigate through that, trying to think outside of the box. What I have learned, I thought that our collaboration skill, like our collaboration across campus, became solid after Harvey. Nothing compared to the way it is now. Student affairs is completely, I would say, perfectly seamlessly transitioned into a space where students are able to get services across without any kind of disruption. We've also worked collaboratively across campus with instruction, and also with academic probation, trying to make sure that we don't, not only are we getting students in, but we are also retaining them. Once the pandemic happened and we switched to online in the spring, students struggled. There was a lot of mental health concerns. I'm a part of the behavioral intervention team on our campus. We were starting to see a little bit of mental health issues coming up. So we were able, from that data, we were able to hire a part-time mental health therapist for our campus, part-time for right now, but I'm have a feeling that our data is going to show the necessity of her being full-time. And so we were able to hire her full-time or part-time so that so we can help students sooner, right? Because sometimes those resources were inundated and students needed something short-term right then and not feel uncomfortable having to be resourced out. So there was a lot of different things that we have done to ensure. We changed modalities. We offer asynchronous, synchronous, hybrid courses, everything social distance, having to fill out forms, making sure masks are done. There was just a lot of different ways that we have been doing it. We have successfully registered and enrolled all of our students remotely. What I mean by that is we are 1.8% in the green on enrollment, which is not heard of in terms of, because people saw a lot of hits in terms of enrollment, especially with the community colleges. And so we've been blessed to be able to not take a hit on our enrollment. So it's been a lot of work, a lot of really being innovative and trying to meet the students where they're at. Google phone, all different platforms, making sure students are comfortable. Using text messaging through Google has been we're starting to go back and look at our actual practices and thinking, maybe we should start moving away from emails and start text messaging students and start doing these other better practices to make sure that we actually can capture the students. So, we've been really beneficial. We've benefited from it in that we're learning how to better serve our students.
Thank you, Dr. Moreno. That was really just amazing to hear the support that's going on. Like you said, the coordination among, even within, I heard a coordination was important during Harvey, even with the surrounding community, right? And resources there, and then the innovative part. You made me think of, I teach K-12 educational leaders, and one student said in class, when Harvey happened, the Katrina binder, because Katrina was also something that affected the Gulf Coast, but you had students coming from Louisiana that then districts prepared for. So he said, our Katrina binder didn't work for Harvey. And so they had to innovate, right? And so COVID has also been another area of innovation. And what I'm hearing from you is that maybe in the future, when we keep encountering challenges, given the context we're living in, that now there's some tools there that you can leverage to to support students so that they can keep pursuing their education. What are some of the challenges, the biggest challenges you've seen right now?
Hotspots. You know, we haven't been able to figure that one out. We do offer Wi-Fi remote access on our campus. So we have a map on our website where students can stay in their cars, you know, socially distanced outside of a specific building that has the best Wi-Fi access for them if they need that. Specifically, you know, because we have a lot of students that are non-traditional students. And so their students are in the school districts. And so, you know, the school districts close their gates at a certain time in terms of being able to have access on their parking lot. So we definitely want them to have access to some of that, but that has been our biggest challenge. Now, we did have a group come together and create for Lee Cares. It's called the Lee Cares Forum, where students are able to get funding from the CARES Act. And that also allowed for, we have a laptop distribution, loaner distribution list. And so students who may not have access to their laptop, we had students asking for laptops in the middle of the semester because their laptop screens died or something came up, or their child needed to use it for school and they needed something in addition because the school districts weren't able to give them one. So we were able to loan out those laptops to students. And so that's been really helpful. But the hotspot has been the biggest challenge for us for sure. And then just, you know, sometimes whenever you're working remotely, you have to VPN into your computer, and, you know, technology doesn't always necessarily work in your favor, and you're trying to register a student that has to be done through VPN. So, but aside from that, we've been super successful in registering our students and advising them. I mean, we had to really look at how we do things. We had to look at our barriers. Do we have too many holds for a student on their record that would not allow for them to register? We had to take a step back and say, okay, maybe we do have too many barriers. And so we're looking at that and trying to reconfigure, you know, is it something that's beneficial for the student later on? And if so, how can we do it to where it doesn't inhibit them from being able to register for class and make that navigation through college more difficult for them? Because we have tons and tons of first generation college students.
I was gonna, this is a Smiley from South Texas College. Sorry for interrupting, because I was gonna add comments about this COVID-19 situation. I think high school did a great job in Rio Grande Valley by sending their buses with antenna, Wi-Fi antenna, to all the colonials. They did better job than colleges, to be honest with you. That's really surprised me. But for our students, what we did, we communicated with a lot of businesses around town, like Starbucks, McDonald's, whatever, that they had free Wi-Fi. And we sent a map of all those free Wi-Fis available to students, that they could go to those places, those locations, which is close to home, and use those free services. Then we found out that some students don't have any computers. And that's another issue, that challenge. So then we start opening some of our labs based on appointments, and they start trickling down and using the open lab. In a lab that has 150, 200 computers, they allowed maybe 10 or 15 at a time. And but the students went through tough and challenging time during the spring semester. I was on a campus during all those time, and I was getting calls from all over. The students they're frustrated, they're trying to reach people. It was very confusing and challenging for them. I feel for all of those students that they had to go through that very difficult time, but we also learned from those, and we sort of started, opening more of our labs. We have a bunch of labs in different buildings and made them accessible, and our library resources, the dean and his team, they open a lot of those labs that are around the campuses. And so they're limited, number of students in each. So they made them available to students. They're coming to college. Now we also have hybrid courses that students are coming for our science labs, that they're following all the protocols of COVID-19. They are coming well prepared. And we had pretty good experience with, we learned a lot from this COVID-19. The life is not going to be like normal, like normal prior to COVID-19, the normal after COVID-19 is going to be different than,
Exactly.
and we have to really be prepared. This was really more a stronger wave than Katrina and Harvey. And I felt for students that they were so desperate and they were looking for resources, and it was just chaotic. And I hope that all the institutions, especially higher education institutions, public schools, it looks like they are very organized. Higher education institutions, they need to really go beyond the call of duty and help our students, college students, because they pay their tuition and fees. Why they have to go somewhere else, look for free Wi-Fi, So we have to make those available to students. And I want to thank all of you that you are doing a great job to really extend the services to students that desperately need those resources. And we need to fight for our students. Really, we are the voice of our students. And we need to support our students. And I know you all do. This is great team. And I drop in once in a while when there is a meeting. I like to listen to all the challenges and successes that you all had, and I learned from those too. I serve as a dean for mathematics, science, information technology, and bachelor's program at South Texas College. And the student is my primary goal. The student is top of my agenda. And I always look for resources, support for our students. And we have 98% Hispanic over here. So we are, and we have our mission is, really to transform lives and communities every minute here.
Thank you so much for sharing those really important points about, especially the disparities with access to technology and how we have to think about those at every level of education. And like what Dr. Moreno said, right, the barriers, like really identifying those barriers, putting ourselves in the shoes of those students and what their experiences might be like, and then translating that into practice. And so I know as a mother, I've been thinking about the children, the classmates of my kids who don't have access to technology. And I was kind of vocal about that on social media in the last day, and saying, like, right now the markers for, we can't really measure success right now normally, like grades and attendance, because those are really markers of privilege. It's based on who has access to a computer and who has access to internet. And so I keep thinking about, it isn't about, oh, just work a little harder and you'll get this. Right now, some folks don't have jobs, it's very different. And you made a good point that this is very different than Katrina and Harvey. Very different. I think every disaster coming our way in the future is going to be very unique in itself. And so, yes, very important to recognize that. And I know we're getting kind of to the end of it. So I did want to acknowledge that there's a question in the chat from Dr. Doran.
Yeah, I saw.
Did you want to address that?
Yeah, I did.
Awesome.
I actually had to hit up my financial aid director real quick and
look
as a
at you.
reminder.
So resourceful.
So if you start hearing my thing chime, it's because they're telling me some stuff. But about the CARES Act allowing to serve undocumented students, this was a really sore subject for us because it did not allow for it. It was just, many of us argued about it. They looked at Title IV, they looked at different options, but essentially what it boiled down to is we ended up finding institutional funds for some of our undocumented students, because based on how the information was written for the CARES Act. So, and the same with international students, is we had to look and see what kinds of institutional funds we had to assist them, because we were not able to utilize the funds that were given to us from the government. So that's essentially how we had to deal with it. I think Maria asked that question, and so did Dr. Duran.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you so much for it. Such an important question. It's also the fact that we're not just in a pandemic, but we have to pay attention to the socio-cultural political context. Yep. and how even during Harvey, undocumented students also, encountered some challenges in seeking being comfortable. Sometimes they were eligible for some supports, but also being comfortable filling out that form.
Exactly.
So that there's
but they did qualify for like the loaner laptop. I mean, it was just certain things that we just couldn't. And so our financial aid director is from South Texas as well. And so he was very adamant about trying to see what he can do to find funds for them. So we worked with our scholarship department to see if there was anything institutional that we can assist with. I did want to mention one more thing when we talked about this concern about the gaps. Our president was very innovative in that she tapped into the school districts superintendents and asked them if they would be willing to split the cost of their graduated seniors, class of 2020, for Goose Creek, which is our main school district, as well as Liberty High School. And what would happen is that if a student comes to school full time, they would split the cost of tuition for the student, so the student can go free, assuming that they didn't have financial aid that would cover it. And so this was a big initiative that we tried to push, because we already saw this lag in students within the Baytown area for students, to come to college. We had about 50% that wouldn't go anywhere, and we couldn't track them. Our assumption is that some of them went into the plants at lower levels to start working because they know someone who knows someone, just to start getting that moving. But so we did see an increase of those students, not as much as we hoped for. So I look forward to continuing this trend. I'm praying that that's going to happen, because I feel like it's a great motivator, because they have post-secondary measure, they get monies from, enrollments in the fall. So they're looking at all of that stuff. So I'm looking for, and you can see Sarah is my colleague who I work with often. She puts information on the chat for y'all. So.
Thank you. I just love the innovation there. Like everything you talked about, we're seeing it play out right in front of us. So thank you both.
It's because we do Facebook Live, and we have a Student Affairs Facebook Live. We host programs, and so most of our Student Affairs people jump on and put things in the chat as we talk about it, so that students have the information. It's saved, and students can go back and watch it and click on those links.
Oh, I love that. That's a great tip.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Doran, I want to turn it back to you.
Thank you. I mean, I think that, I think that there's just a lot of interesting little nuggets that were in there in terms of, I think, even getting creative with texting or Facebook Live, which are things that, students can use on their phones, or just connecting them. We talk so much, I think, amongst ourselves as faculty and administrators about Zoom fatigue, and just not wanting to do like a whole nother reason to jump on Zoom, which thank you all for being here. By the way, I recognize the irony of me saying this as we're on Zoom. So yeah, it's, and I think that the quote that Dr. Lopez said about, the Katrina binder didn't work for Harvey, I think is just, it's so interesting to think about, because it's like, obviously the Harvey binder wouldn't work for COVID. And so, yeah, just how do these big events just bring to bear, the shortcomings of the work that we're trying to do, and the equity issues that we still face no matter how hard we try. So thank you all for sharing your knowledge and your insights. I really appreciate it. I don't know if there's any other questions that folks want to ask.
I just wanted to say thank you to both of our speakers for joining us this afternoon. This was very insightful. I actually found it fascinating that Dr. Romero was talking about the tangible harm that students were going through, but yet it didn't seem to register to them at the beginning. Till later on, they spoke to them about, well, did you lose your car? Did this happen, that happened, etc. So it made me think of the resiliency that our students have, where things happen and they just kind of shake it off and keep pushing and pushing. And I think that is very commendable. And sometimes, sometimes when people face trauma, it doesn't really hit you right away.
Exactly.
It's days later that you begin to feel, that something is wrong. So, my thinking was, how do we nurture that sense of resiliences, or, that fighting spirit that our students have. And then I was really impressed by the work at Lee College. and the fact that you had enrollment gain, I gather. Um, and um, and I'm wondering if there were any losses in the spring for students, and then how you went about to ensure growth during this period.
So it's funny you asked that because we decided to change our grading option to NCR or no credit or satisfactory.
Okay.
And when we did that, we extended that past the time that the student completed the course so that they could choose we were really trying to encourage the student to stay in.
Right.
We did lose some students. There were some students that either got the virus, someone in their family got the virus, they just couldn't do it. Many different things. They couldn't handle the kids at the house.
Right.
I mean, we have a lot of parents that had to stop everything. Who's going to take care of our children during this pandemic, losing jobs? And so that stuff was uncontrollable, but we did also offer another incentive in the summer. We allowed for free summer for anyone who lived in our, like we had 4 eligibility. So they had to live in the Baytown. They had to go to a Goose Creek school. I can't remember. They had to be enrolled for the spring. And then there was one more I can't remember because it went so fast. But so we did that, and we were up. I want to say, and Sarah, correct me if I'm wrong. I think double what we usually have in enrollments for summer.
Wow.
And so we're just now, Sarah and I work on the data for advising, and we're just now looking at how many students were on academic probation. We were nervous in seeing that, but we think that a lot of students, it was a lot less than I thought. We think that a lot of students were either did the no credit satisfactory, or actually were really pulled it off. I mean, some students really like the online option. They really enjoy working from home and having their own pace. And so once they work through that modality, whether or not it's hybrid or asynchronous or synchronous, or if it's hybrid, that's the stuff that, they're trying to figure out right now. So we didn't see too much of a decrease, but we need to go back and look at that data. We're still registering, by the way. We still have a 10-week term. Our 13-week just started. We have a 10-week term that starts on October 5th. We have another 8-week term and another 5-week term. So that was another thing that we had to be innovative on. We no longer just offered 16-week, 5 or 8-week, 8-week. Now we're looking at multiple terms, and we did that because we had the school district start later here, and we wanted to get the parents, we wanted them to get situated and then come to school. Does that make sense? And so we had to be very innovative in how we offered those courses for our students. But I'm glad you asked that question. So I know Sarah's taking notes, and we're probably going to start looking at some of that and diving into the students that we.
Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Thank you very much.
Comments.
Yes.
Well, thank you very much. Since we're coming up to the hour, I want to be mindful of everybody's time. Thank you, Dr. Moreno. Thank you, Dr. Lopez. This was wonderful, and we really, really appreciate your time and effort. Before we log off, I just want to say in the chat box, I had reshared the Ascender flyer. This is for folks who may have come in a little bit late. We will be hosting the Transfer Motivational Conference for students next Friday. So the chat box has the flyer. Please share that out with your students and encourage them to attend. And then the Ascender Fall Seminar will be taking place on October the 16th. So if you have any questions, let us know. More information should be forthcoming very, very soon. And other than that, I hope everybody has a great rest of their Thursday, of their week, and can stay healthy, stay well during this time.
Yes.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much for having us.
Bye. Thank you. Great to see everybody. And we'll see the math people tomorrow morning or
Bye.
afternoon.